I want our workplaces to look like the societies that we live in.
Racial balancing is what a lot of people would call that.
It is harming society.
But you don't think that the previous system was also socially engineered?
Let's say we can crush the whole thing right now and build it from scratch. What would good DEI look like to you?
I've been the Chief Diversity Officer of Fortune 500 companies.
I served for 5 years as a diversity officer.
I was a DEI officer.
I was the Chief Sustainability Officer, and DEI was a component of what I was doing.
Okay, first question. Is DEI discriminatory?
The tyranny of so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
To me, the values of diversity, equality, inclusion are core strengths of America.
DEI innately means that people who are unqualified are going to advance in life by dint of the fact that they are considered a part of a victimized group.
You should be hired and promoted based on skill and competence, not race or gender.
Well, it depends on the DEI you're talking about. I think contemporary DEI, a lot of the manifestations are discriminatory by nature, but they don't have to be. The discriminatory kind is the kind that is really about, oppressor versus oppressed. So it's inherently discriminatory in that you're pitting people in each category just by looks or identity or something like that. But when I think of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think of no discrimination whatsoever. It's more like the 60s civil rights kind of classical liberal take on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So I think it's completely discriminatory. I think it institutionalizes racism, like it's a direct attack on meritocracy. Everything becomes, it's about your identity. I'm all for equal opportunity, not equal outcome. Mm-hmm. And there's no place in the workplace for identity politics.
So when I think about DEI, I think about the conceptual ideals behind it, and then there's the interpretation and the implementation. And I think conceptually speaking, no one would disagree that DEI in principle would be a set of good things to have. As you mentioned, equality is a good thing to have. But I think the implementation is what makes it very difficult. And you mentioned equality of outcome. And I think that may be a myth around what equity is intended to mean. So when we talk about equity, it's not really equity of outcomes. It's equity of opportunity, equity of access, equity of information. The key is not to equate everyone at the outcome level. And I would agree if that were the case, that would be discriminatory. But I think the key is to make sure that everybody has a level playing field. And that's just not the reality that we have. And that's where equity is important.
Who decides that, though? Someone has to be in charge. Why can't you just let the market do it?
Well, here's the thing, right? We can assume that the market will drive it, but women have been graduating at the top, have been graduating with the majority of undergraduate degrees and graduate degrees since 1983, so over 40 years. Yet women still make up a tiny, small percentage of senior leaders within organizations. Do we assume that that is because women are simply not as meritorious of success and they somehow, going from undergraduate and graduate school to the corporate world, they somehow lose their capabilities? Or can we say there's a system in place within corporations that favor certain characteristics that are very gendered and biased? I actually don't think that any of us are necessarily disagreeing. Like, my goal is to create more perfect meritocratic organizational systems. Right now, we have systems in place that favor certain characteristics over another, and the goal is removing those discriminatory biased systems.
But how are you doing that? You're imposing bureaucracy.
Actually not.
Quota system.
But DEI has never been a quota system.
Exactly.
It is
I have never instituted, in my 25 years of doing this work, I have never set a quota. I'm looking at system, and the way that you look at system is through deep, boring statistical analysis to see if we hold all things equal, what is the degree to which various different protected classes impact? So, for example,
what is a protected class? I don't even
protected
understand
class is what
language.
is, yeah, so that's the problem. A lot of people, no, not you, but the problem is that a lot of people who have become practitioners in the last couple of years don't know the legacy. What is a protected class? It's what is articulated in the civil rights laws of 1960s and 70s. And a protected class is gender. It's not women, it's gender. A protected class is race. So I'll give you a really good example. If a white man came to me and said, I am being discriminated based on my race as a white man, and there's data and there's proven documentation of that discrimination, that is a case that DEI would advocate for because race is a protected class.
I think in academia, that white person would get laughed out of the room.
And that's the problem.
I would agree with this premise in academia as well. It's not something that would be considered a case that could be taken up, for example, to an office of DEI. I agree with you that in principle that should be the case, but that's not the implementation. That's not what's happening.
But in
I just want to
practice-
mention one other thing about the meritocracy issue that you mentioned. I think that we're under the impression that there is this meritocracy that we need to be able to preserve it. But the rules that we apply, if somebody's applying for a job or somebody is going up for a promotion, are ingrained in discriminatory behavior. In general, you have a system that is not actually promoting meritocracy the way that we want.
I think that we have made the world much more discriminatory, and we've moved further from meritocracy. Every corporation I've worked at, and I've worked at some of the biggest ones, there was always a quota system. I had a regular, kind of mainstream investment banking career, and then, I fell for this ideology. I thought that the quota system would create, equal opportunities.
Harvard has, we believe, a hard, specific quota.
Their boards needed to conform with certain gender, race, and sexual orientation quotas.
Quotas. A few spots would be reserved for minority applicants.
But actually, the result was that it actually institutionalized more discrimination, more racism. And everyone's kind of looking around. It's like, holy like I'm working so hard, but my identity is going to determine whether or not I get that board seat. That's when the penny dropped for me. Nobody should be imposing a social construct and choosing who, is in a seat of power. It should be merit-based.
Shall I?
Yeah.
My work as a DEI officer accomplished nothing. Initially, it accomplished some things. People showed up for workshops that were informative, but then things started to happen. Fewer people would show up, or the same 5 people would show up. So it wasn't a great experience. It didn't accomplish much at all, and that's my story.
We rigged everything. So that's my story. So I was supposed to set diversity targets, and I reported directly to the CEO in a board meeting. I'm actually given a script. It says, the top, main management, there should be a gender ratio of 27%. So I'm looking down, I'm like, 27%? Why 27%? I didn't give that number. I mean, aren't we supposed to be shooting for 50-50 or something like that? And global head of HR said, well, we're right now at 27%. And I'm like, holy shit. You're rigging the target. And they rigged the target because guess what? The CEO's comp was linked to DEI.
And this goes back to something that Michael said. There's what DEI is and then what it has become in recent years. I think that the situation you described is horrible. And I would have been the first person to be like, this is ridiculous. We're rigging the system. I mean, I wouldn't have done the work for as long as I did if I didn't think that I was having some kind of impact, because my whole goal is to make things better. I was the first C-suite level chief diversity officer at Uber Technologies, and I was hired during a particularly intense period of crisis.
More than 200 claims of sexual harassment, bullying, and inappropriate behavior.
Unfair pay and other workplace discrimination.
And I think we did a pretty good job. I've brought a very rigorous approach to diversity, equity, inclusion. For the first 30 years of its existence as a career, as a profession, was a very niche field. There were maybe a few hundred practitioners in all the United States, and frankly, we pretty much knew each other. And then in the last 5 to 6 years, that number of practitioners quadrupled in size, quintupled in size. That's when you got into a lot of the more performative, more symbolic gestures. And I think that's when the work became far less impactful. I've been doing the work since before it was called DEI, before it was called D&I. It was mostly just called Women in the Workplace. That's actually how a lot of the work began. I implemented the very first parental leave policy. I implemented the first accessibility, disability, ADA compliance roles, right? The most successful elements of a DEI program have become so interwoven into the norms of what we think this is just what a good workplace looks like, that people have forgotten these are the things that DEI does.
So I became chief diversity officer in a school affiliated with a major university in 2020. So this was just after George Floyd. And initially, my mandate was based on statistics. There's fundamentally a problem with the numbers that we're seeing right now with our faculty, with our graduate students, with our undergraduate students, and we need these numbers to really reflect the communities that we serve. And when I stepped into that role, I realized that this is not something that a quota system can fix. This is not something where we can say, we just need to hire more Black people or more Hispanic people. That is not the solution. The solution is to figure out if there are systemic inequities that are preventing this from happening. So we found out very quickly that jobs were being advertised through a few venues that were only accessible to certain groups of individuals and not others, that were not visible to certain individuals. And by fixing that problem, we started to get a lot more applications from other groups. But again, my views on this are nuanced. So the reason I want to go back to what Erec said earlier, accomplish nothing, I actually align with that view. If DEI efforts are actually successful, then you should not need a DEI officer. You should not need a DEI office. You should not need an independent thing.
Yes, I
it should
agree with
be ingrained into the culture of the organization that you're serving. And as soon as I stepped out of that role, everything that we've done disappeared. All of the initiatives disappeared. The funding for it disappeared, and nobody cared anymore.
Yeah.
It just went away, which tells me it was fragile to begin with. It was not set up as a foundational set of elements.
Performative.
And that's exactly, it's performative. So I wrote an op-ed for Inside Higher Education titled Confessions of a Reformed DEI Officer. I talked about some of our successful experiences when it came to hiring initiatives, when it came to improving outcomes for students, but I also spoke out against things that I thought were very performative.
We acknowledge this land, which is named for the Ute tribe.
Stanford sits on the ancestral lands of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe.
We want to acknowledge that the land where the Microsoft campus is situated was traditionally occupied by the Sammamish.
I basically said that I don't believe in land acknowledgements because I think that they are used as a band-aid, as a way to be able to say, hey, we did something, we gestured in some way, but there's no real substance behind it. So what's the point of all this aside from just making ourselves feel good about saying it and putting it on a website? Agree or disagree, I value diversity in my workplace.
I agree with that.
I value it. Yes, I value it. I don't always value the way it's achieved, right? I mean, we did talk about quota systems already. They do exist. I'm glad they don't exist in your world. I'm very happy about that. But they do exist in other people's worlds. And that is something that I don't value for various reasons. A reason that doesn't come up very much is how the minority person feels knowing that there was some kind of quota or something like that, and how other people may treat him or her based on that. We don't talk about that enough. That is a thing.
I don't want to be seen as being the diversity hire.
I just graduated from Columbia University. I suspect that I would have gotten in if I were white or Asian, but I don't actually know that.
I have a Black female surgeon. My first assumption will be this person had to meet lower standards.
That has come up so much in my career, where a lot of women who got promoted to partner or who got promoted to managing director, people would come up to them and literally be like, it must be nice that you got promoted because you're a woman. Or it must be nice that you got promoted because you're Black. It did create that idea that they got there out of special treatment. And so a lot of the work that you have to do is actually transparency of the systematic changes that you've made. The single most impactful thing that I've ever done to transform how people looked at talent during promotion processes wasn't to set a quota. It was to simply give every manager on a team, here's a list of people who are eligible for promotion. Here's the criteria. Here's how long they've been enrolled. Here's how long, here's their performance history. That little mental trick gives people going, oh, I didn't even realize that Sally was eligible for promotion. And I appreciate a workplace that looks like the community that I live in. And we live in a diverse society, and I want our workplaces to look like the societies that we live in.
Racial balancing is what a lot of people would call that. You know,
I would not.
Okay. Oh my God, I have the big one. Hypothetical scenario. Two equally qualified candidates are applying for the same role. One is a racial minority, the other is not. Should their identities be factors in who gets the job?
Equally qualified.
There's no such thing.
Yeah, right.
There's no such thing.
Are they clones?
Yeah.
But one's painted brown?
That's why it's hypothetical. Right?
I personally could not respond to that hypothetical because I've never seen that hypothetical exist in the real world.
How about we take this and we turn this, because I think we're all going to agree here. But let's flip this hypothetical scenario to this. Let's just say you have this great visionary CEO, right, who's not like a biased asshole, just like the policy is hire the best. How would you guys feel if, in hiring the best, there is a room, like 10 executives, they're all white, they're all named Bill, but there's like true debate? Would that be okay at your organization?
So there's actually research that shows I could have 8 Asian women around me. Even if there's ideological differences, we will find the things that we share in common and we'll build a bond based on that. Where diversity of thought really comes up is when you are reminded on a daily basis, this person is somehow different from me, right? This person is probably not going to have the same life experience as me.
And that is disagree.
But it's research. It's not
That's
not
not research. That's McKinsey's
I don't want
research.
No, it's not McKinsey. It's academic research. It's academic
A lot
research.
of this research has been debunked. Why can't we just judge people on their performance, their merit, their mind?
I want you to talk to me before you know who I am.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that doesn't happen a lot. People are saying, oh, you're different, and I have to take that into consideration. I didn't tell you that. How come I don't get a say in how you treat me?
But going back to your point, Desiree, if you do have a room that is filled with, white men named Bill, in academic circles as well, when you have a group that is very homogeneous, they tend to produce lesser quality research. They tend to produce far less technologically innovative products. All of those things tend to go down when you have homogeneity.
A lot of this stuff has been debunked.
I think a lot of the racial equity stuff you're talking about, yes, there's data for and against, but the idea that diversity actually enhances the quality of a workplace, when we talk about diversity broadly construed, when it's really perspective diversity, that has been reproduced thousands of times at this point across so many different, but exactly, perspective diversity. So you're going beyond just race, ethnicity, gender. You're really talking about diversity.
But then you're talking about the quality, the person, and it doesn't matter what they look like or what they're named.
But that's where we don't disagree.
You don't know.
I think you're right.
My experience is,
I don't think
as
any
a
of us
female is very different from
I don't think
someone
any of
else's.
us disagree with that opinion that our experiences, our ideologies, our perspectives are the most important thing. But someone's going to look at me, and I'll tell you, people look at me, they look at my name, and they're like, she's a first-generation immigrant. She's going to be quiet and docile. I have been treated like a stereotypical Asian woman countless times in my life, and I reject that because I'm
but
not.
Then why are you enforcing it?
A lot of DEI
I'm not enforcing any of it.
I don't think she is.
I'm not enforcing it. You're
disagreeable.
projecting how the work gets done, not listening to how I do the work.
But if this is the case, it doesn't matter if everyone in the room kind of looks like each other. You just made the point. We all have different experiences. It's not based on, your image. And that is my point. No one should be socially engineering any organization.
Agreed.
You just have to.
I agree.
But can we go back to the question, the hypothetical for a second? Because I think it is actually a good hypothetical, even though you may not, that's why it's a hypothetical. We may not see it out in the real world, right? But given to similarly or identically qualified individuals, but different races or maybe even different genders, which one would you hire? If they're bringing different perspectives, let's say they're bringing a perspective that I don't have enriched around that table right now, that might make them more qualified. So it's in context. It's not just, the individual is not diverse. Diversity is a quality of the collective, right?
A common misconception about DEI is
that it's all about race.
I totally agree with that it's all about race, yeah.
That everyone involved wants to tear down Western civilization.
Yes, like that.
See, and here's the thing. In academia, the people I know who are in charge of DEI initiatives and things like that do want to tear down the world and do hate capitalism.
Yes.
And it's not even a question.
Yeah.
You can't even, here are the merits of capitalism. You can't even do that.
Yeah. I used to do this little exercise with all the teams that I would run, and I'd periodically do it. And I'd always, during a team meeting, go, why does our team exist here at the company? And my teams would give me these highfalutin answers. And I'm like, no. our team exists to help our organization increase revenue. If you don't believe our goal is to help increase shareholder value, I said, you're on the wrong team. Go do this work in a nonprofit. Like I always said, we can show that there is a better way to make revenue than simply allowing for like a singular identity of talent to like flow through an organization.
That level of pragmatism is missing from so much DEI
I agree.
I've seen.
I agree 100%. Yes.
Okay, but McKinsey did a study and linked DEI, so the most diversified companies, looking at, board level or management, is more profitable. Now that McKinsey study has been debunked, right? It was flawed. It cherry-picked data. There is no linkage between DEI and profitability. Like it or not, all of the propaganda about how diversified the company looks, it actually takes away from the company. I think that the world would be much better. We would have much more debate, and we'd have a greater speaking up culture if DEI.
I think you're attributing way too much to DEI here.
Something has changed in academia, because 15 years ago I was considered a bleeding heart liberal, and now I'm a Nazi by the same people.
I'm called
right?
Nazi
Something's
too.
changed.
Yeah.
I don't know how the Overton window has shifted that far, but it has shifted. In 2019, I heard a keynote address at a conference for rhetoric that teaching standard English to students of color, particularly Black students, was inherently racist. I spoke out against the keynote address. I said we should not be demonizing standardized English like this. It's a valuable tool. I was attacked and called a white supremacist. I realized what this ideology really was. It wasn't about, equality regardless of skin color or sex or ethnicity or whatever. It wasn't about having everybody get the resources they need to fulfill their dreams. I still want the world to be a diverse and equal place, but the way it's being done in too many institutions is not to my liking.
Okay, agree or disagree, equity is more important than equality. Maybe I'll start with this one. I'm sure all of you have seen like these caricatures that show equity versus equality over the fence and all that. There's a caricature of equity to try to paint a picture whereby it's different from equality. And it depicts three individuals at varying heights, and they're all trying to watch a ball game, but behind a barrier. And the barrier, of course, obscures the view from the shortest individual, makes it so that the tallest individual has access directly. And to have equality, you provide the same kind of stool for everyone, but you still have an inability of the shortest individual to be able to see the game. And with equity, what you do is you provide additional stools to allow even the shortest person to see it. When we think about the ways that equity has been implemented, in terms of if somebody is coming from a different background or has not had access, providing them with a differential level of resources, they can get up to that level playing field. That's a Band-Aid. That is a temporary fix. If we don't actually work to resolve whatever systemic inequity there is, then that's always going to fail. So I like to see that whole wall just coming down so that there's nothing that's preventing anyone from succeeding. But if there's this wall and we're trying to figure out how do we get the right level of access to be able to overcome that wall, the problem is we still have a wall.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think there's a difference between a barrier and an obstacle. Barrier is something that shouldn't be there. Right? We shouldn't have to overcome it. It should go away. But people look at obstacles and see barriers. Mm-hmm. AP English isn't a barrier.
Yes,
right?
I agree.
Don't get rid of it because people aren't overcoming it. Right? I think that's the issue. I think a lot of obstacles are being called barriers.
Yeah,
I agree. And I
would agree with that. Like, I think that people sometimes see rigor and inclusion as being oppositional forces, right? Like they're like, oh, we have to remove rigor in order to be inclusive. And I'm like, no. We keep the rigor there. But to your point, what are the systematic barriers that prevent certain populations of people from getting access to AP classes? And one of them is they don't offer AP classes in lower income schools. How do we change that? But you don't change the standards of the AP classes once you introduce them into those schools. You shouldn't. You shouldn't change them at all. And I believe that's why DEI exists, because there are those barriers.
I think this whole equity thing is communist propaganda. Life is unfair. There will always be differences and barriers and obstacles. whatever. And through freedom, as Milton Friedman said, we will get more equality.
In my opinion, a society that aims for equality before liberty will end up with neither equality nor liberty. You can only aim at equality by giving some people the right to take things from others.
We just need to work as hard as we can, and things kind of just shake out.
Can I just ask, so it seems like you're taking a real hardline view on this. And I'm just curious, was there ever a time where you believed that at
100%.
least some measure of equity was appropriate?
100%.
And what did that look like for you?
So I was one of the biggest champions of DEI, and then I red-pilled in 2020, 2021, because I saw the adverse outcomes. The intentions were good. They were, right? But it wasn't that we just practice it badly. It was that it is bad. It is harming society.
That's where critical social justice comes in. That's the kind of DEI you're talking about right now. That is influenced by Marxism, but I don't think they're doing that.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's all the same. It doesn't matter.
It's
whether
not all the
it's
same. You can't consolidate something that is very complex into these like sound bites of like you're saying like freedom was better than DEI, and I'm like and social and that DEI is social engineering. But you don't think that the previous system was also socially engineered? You don't think that there was ideology? There was absolutely ideology in those previous systems.
No, I don't think there's ideology. There was cronyism and lack of accountability.
That in and of itself is a system.
We haven't fixed it. We've gone to the wrong problem. We've gone to identity politics. And now having a bigger HR system and more consultants coming in, there's less accountability. There's less transparency. Here we go. Agree or disagree? A company should prevent employees from using language that might be offensive to people of certain backgrounds.
An initiative to eliminate harmful language,
like beating a dead horse, turning a blind eye.
And that, my friends, is an example of a microaggression.
This is the whole microaggression thing, which is really tricky. Because a microaggression can be anything, really. You can ask somebody what time it is, and they will be like, "Are you testing my ability to tell time because I'm black?" Anything can be a microaggression. Right. So that is a minefield right there. That said, there are some things I don't want to hear. I don't want to be called the N-word.
Yeah.
So there is a line.
Yeah.
But that line has been moved substantially too far to the other side.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of the reasons why I have always rejected this idea of including psychological safety into the work that I did. Like for years, my team was like, "Bo, we have to start addressing psychological safety." And I go, no, because how psychologically safe a person feels has much more to do with like their entire life and the trauma and their own like self-confidence than anything that I can possibly do. And I'm not going to take responsibility for whether somebody goes to therapy or not.
I know DEI officers who would call you a white supremacist for saying that.
There are
Many.
people. Yes, same thing happens with me, right? You said at one point you were like bleeding heart, and now you're like considered like a Nazi. Like I would say that some people would look at me calling me a capitalist pig. But I agree with you. There is too much over-policing of language, but there is a line wherein we know the N-word is problematic. That should not be in the workplace. Using any kind of racial slur or any genderedized, like the B word or the R word, that's like, you can't have that in the workplace.
I do agree. I think that there's lines that should not be crossed, but we've always had those lines. That's not a nuance of DEI. That's not a new thing. So I want to go back to the idea of psychological safety because I think that's really at the core of this question. So one interpretation is that you want to be in an environment where nothing will ever be said that harms you, even given your background, which is ludicrous, right? I mean, nobody could ever expect to do that. But the other way to think about psychological safety is the idea that you should be free to challenge others. It should be about being able to have a free exchange of ideas, as long as you're not directly attacking one another, but be able to challenge ideas.
But has DEI promoted a speak-up culture? Because I would argue
what I've tried to do in 5 years as
opposite.
DEI officer is exactly that.
But it hasn't. But the result is that
not everywhere.
Not everywhere. Like
Not everywhere.
like you're hearing two people who have done this work for an extremely long time, and we're giving you examples of how we've done the work.
And I'm saying that in the boardroom, right? When
I've been in the boardroom.
There is an echo chamber. In the past, you could do this. You can say, line item 27 is wrong. The calculation is wrong, right? You see this horrible mistake. Today's world, you have to say like, "Oh, so sorry."
That is not happening.
Can you please walk through line item 27 and explain to me how you calculated that number?
I literally had my board meeting 2 weeks ago. And I will tell you, that kind of rigor that you're talking about still exists.
I've never seen it. Never. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. I do not see that. I see much more of a council culture. There's very little speaking up.
That's not what I'm seeing in boardrooms. Okay. Agree or disagree? Companies should make statements about social issues and global affairs.
Disagree.
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 Delta CEO Ed Bastian is now strongly condemning Georgia's controversial new voting law.
Hundreds of multinational brands came out in support of Israel.
Apple, PayPal, and Salesforce have strongly criticized the law.
I'm going to give a more nuanced perspective on that, especially since 2020. I had employees come to me and say, we need to talk about this earthquake and we need to talk about this conflict in the Middle East. Eventually, the number of requests coming in saying this company should say something became so great that I created a rubric. And I said, 1, does this issue impact our business? Yes or no? If it's no, we don't say anything. If it's yes, then do we have expertise to comment on this issue? If the answer is no, we don't comment on it. And I would say most companies, 95% of the time, don't have the impact of the business and the expertise. But in 5% of the time, I think that there is an opportunity to say something as relevant to
Academia is a very different space because I know people who would say a rubric is a white way of knowing. So when it comes to mentioning things like this, talking about social events and things like that, it's a no-brainer. You talk about it, especially if it involves a downtrodden group. And I think campuses should be neutral.
Yeah, I agree. I think in general they should remain neutral because their communities are very diverse and they're going to have many, many different opinions and they're going to be representing only one segment of that and not the others. The only exception, and it's not truly an exception, just in terms of supporting communities that are impacted by a global event or something that happens to affect a certain group, being able to send a message to those individuals or a message of support to say, we're here for you. We realize your families have been impacted by this, whatever it is.
I mean, let's take climate change as an example, right? Most companies in 2020, 2021, made pledges to go net zero.
Net zero.
Net zero.
Net zero emissions by 2050.
100% green by the year 2050.
Right, so everyone signed up to net zero, go Greta Thunberg, let's save the environment. But really, what did net zero achieve? Net zero achieved, it was just image control. It was form over substance. So I'm absolutely adamant that businesses should just focus on what they do best, make good products and services, and stay completely out of the political arena.
So I actually agree with you. There was a similar initiative with 300 different CEOs of large Fortune 1000 companies who were all coming together to band together to support DEI. And my CEO of my company at the time said to me, they go, Bo, do you think I should join? And I said, absolutely not. And they were like, why? And I said, because this is a bunch of symbolic bull. And it's going to achieve absolutely nothing. I'd rather you spend your time focused on your organization, supporting the things that needed to happen.
Yep.
And you know what? Everybody cares about the shareholder price. So you get that shareholder price out of the 30s, and the CEO did his job, and he did it while also supporting DEI, but not engaging in any of this symbolic stuff. Too much of this work has become about virtue signal.
100%.
Every day, General Mills serves the world by making food people love. And inclusion is one of our secret ingredients.
Shop Black owned.
Mexican American owned.
Korean and queer owned.
One common DEI practice we can all agree needs to be eliminated is
training.
Hello, and welcome to Training on Workplace Harassment.
Diversity statements.
Most job applications require, a resume, maybe a few references. But at the University of Washington, you'll also need a one-page diversity statement.
I would just say there shouldn't be any DEI.
Is the Civil Rights Act enough?
Yeah, we have laws, right, and enforcement. So, if
we don't have enforcement. There's no enforcement anymore. That's been dismantled. The EEOC has completely been
That's not
dismantled.
true.
If that's the case, then that's the mission. We need to,
But that's not true. You work in organizations. You're telling me you've never seen a lawsuit where woman or said person
but in the last 2 years,
and
it is not being implemented at all.
It happens all the time. There are tremendous settlements.
I would say one thing to eliminate is diversity offices.
I don't disagree with that.
Over the course of this conversation, I've changed my mind about Everybody's looking at me. Well, what did I change my mind about? I mean, I kind of already knew this, but I know it more now. There are a lot of people out there doing good work. I appreciate what you two are doing in your respective places, and keep up the good work if you can.
I would say I learned that maybe I underappreciated the degree to which DEI has been misconstrued, misused, maybe even abused, and leading to very, very poor and flawed implementations. And in particular, hearing from Desiree about her experience has been really helpful to think about how these things get implemented across different sectors, different industries. I'm aware of the flaws and imperfections of it in the academic setting, but hearing about that in the corporate world is illuminating.
I don't know. Do you want to go ahead?
Well, what I appreciate in this conversation that everyone has been candid, but I do have to unfortunately say I haven't changed my mind about DEI. I just think that it is a flawed ideology. We'll never progress and get to the really great stuff, the brilliance, if we're, cleansing everything and socially engineering things. I think we just overall lose out on innovation.
What I think I've changed my mind about, or not really changed my mind about, but recognize something that I have to do more. So I need to play a larger role in helping to demystify what the work should look like, and also helping those who are opposed to the work understand that there is a better way of doing the work that will benefit all people, that will benefit companies. It will build better meritocracy. It will build more constructive conversation. But I think the loudest voices sometimes in the room are not the ones that are portraying the work in the best manner possible. So I think that is something that I'll take away from here is recognizing the need for a more robust about what good versus non-good DEI looks like.
So can I just ask a question, maybe building on what Bo just said about good versus not good DEI? Is there a world, let's say we can crush the whole thing right now and build it from scratch. Is there such a thing that you would, what would good DEI look like to you?
Well, I would take the money that is in DEI departments anyway, and use that to fund outreach programs for local high schools, middle schools, things like that. Yeah. That's what I would like to see.
So I'm more of a libertarian. I want to see smaller government, less bureaucracy. So the best way that we can improve opportunity is through economic growth. 1 billion people were pulled out of abject poverty since 1990 because of the capitalist system, because of access to fossil fuels.
I think the market's powerful, yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let the market shake it out. Let's hire the best with as little intervention as possible.
I agree with you 100% in that we want to improve the quality of life for everybody. I think the only place, and I think truly where this conversation boils down to, is the mechanism by which we get there, right? And I think sometimes these conversations get so polarized that you think you're actually trying to work towards different things. And if we could just simply get to the place where we're having difficult conversations, but we're not attacking character, we're talking about the mechanisms by which we get there. I think that's where we'll get to the best solutions.
This was a good example of a difficult conversation.
Okay,
Thank you.